Okay, Mike, you can go ahead.
Right, well, welcome everybody to this SciFest online webinar on innovations and technologies in agriculture, a very important and relevant topic. It's being offered in the International Year of Plant Health, which of course has the theme, Take Root, Nurture. Now, while the general impression of farmers may be that they're kind of laid back individuals who watch their crops and cattle grow, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, since the beginning of settled agriculture over 8,000 years ago, farmers and other kinds of agriculturalists have been at the forefront of innovative technologies such as artificial selection, the invention of the plow, plant seeders, reaping and threshing machines, windmills, sprinklers, and so on. In fact, I would argue that agriculture is one of the most tech-aware sectors in the world, and it's being disrupted and improved on a massive scale by new technologies, especially here in Africa. Farmers are now adopting new innovations such as drones, sensors, big data, crowd farming, hydroponic systems, farm management software, and in vitro cultivation, amongst many others, to increase yields while lowering production costs and promoting resilience in the face of challenges such as climate change. These innovations are playing a significant role in creating a sustainable future for farming and agriculture and all the beneficiaries from them. And this webinar will explore the impact, opportunities, and challenges that innovation and technology have brought to agriculture. We have a panelist of 4 people today. One has dropped out, so we've gone from 5 to 4. And I will briefly introduce them before making some introductory comments of my own and then posing questions to the panelists. Our first panelist is a guest from Nigeria, Christopher Abiodun, who's an IT expert with over 15 years experience in software development, internet network implementation, ICT consultation, and project management, and has led several teams who have implemented ICT projects in Nigeria. He's a qualified advanced software engineer, and he's one of the founders and the CTO and business leader of Farm Crowdy, an ag tech company that provides tools and technology for farmers to boost food production. Our next panelist is Gillis van Reinsberg, who's the founder and CEO of Fresh Life Produce Pty Limited. He started to develop an Africanized sustainable growing system in 2015, working with multiple alternative growing systems, including conventional aquaponics and hydroponics. He soon realized that these technologies are not 100% suited for South African realities, as they are too technical, capital and time intensive and bulky, and the yield per cost ratio makes them too expensive. After being exposed to vertical hydroponics, he developed a novel Africanized vertical growing system that is easy to transport, does not require specialized knowledge or special tools, is affordable, and has a high yield. Our next panelist is Dr. Fritoli Mangana, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Biodiversity, University of Limpopo. He has extensive experience in basic and applied sciences, specializing in plant metabolism and improvements in response to biotic and abiotic stress. His research involves the genetic transformation of recalcitrant legumes and micropropagation using plant tissue culture. He's a multi-award-winning research scientist who's deeply involved in international research and collaboration. Now, our fifth panelist was Mzansi Izati Mabadi, who unfortunately can't join us. So our final panelist is Johan Renzi van Reinsberg from South Africa. He's CEO of Reed ISA Pty Limited, which focuses on the development and support of conservation agriculture technologies in rural, township, and urban spaces, so as to drive food safety and promote local entrepreneurship. He was previously the CSIR Strategic Research and Initiative Manager for Rural Enterprise and Economic Development, with the responsibility for integrating the CSIR's offering into the South African and SADC rural techno-socioeconomic development spaces. Right, so those are our esteemed panel of experts. Now, to kick off, I'd like to give some recent examples of innovation in agriculture and stock farming that I've come across during research for a book that I've written on African innovation. Now, I'll start with a very low-tech but effective one. Northern Botswana, cattle farmers are having problems with lions eating their cattle. They needed to solve the problem without shooting the lions, so they devised a cunning way to stop the lions preying on their cattle. In a project involving over 2,000 cattle from 100+ herds, they painted a large eye spot on the rumps of 1/3 of their cattle, a simple cross on another third, and left the last third unpainted. All the cattle foraged in the same area and were exposed to a similar risk of predation. Remarkably, after 4 years, none of the 1,683 cows with painted eyes were taken. Only 0.7% of those with painted crosses were lost, and the normal number, 1.8%, of the unpainted cows were killed. And these results confirmed their hunch that creating the perception that the predator had been seen by the prey could cause it to abandon the hunt. Here's an example of a sort of hybrid low-tech, high-tech innovation. Muthoni Masindi grew up in a rural farming community in Kenya, where she learned that farmers predict the weather and especially the threat of droughts by relying on indigenous knowledge about natural cycles, such as when flowers bloom, the behavior of mammals, birds, and insects. And she realized that while these natural signals were useful, they were not accurate. So she decided to develop a tool that uses modern science combined with indigenous knowledge to improve the accuracy of weather predictions for farmers who don't have access to web-based forecasts. She developed a smartphone app and website called Itiki that combines indigenous knowledge and accurate weather prediction data and acts as an early warning system for small-scale farmers, especially for droughts. And the app is now widely used in South Africa, Mozambique, and Kenya, and is showing very promising results. In Nigeria, which is the largest producer of cowpeas in the world, an important source of protein in West Africa, the yields have been greatly reduced by an insect pest, the cowpea pod borer. And although farmers have used chemical insecticides to control the pest, these are expensive and dangerous to human and environmental health. And they've now developed a genetically modified variety of cowpea that has been produced that carries a microbial insecticidal gene from a soil bacterium that can produce a natural insecticide. In 2019, the GM cowpea variety was approved for release to smallholder farmers in Nigeria, and it's the first GM food crop in that country. Another example involves the locust plague, which has been a major problem in Northeast and East Africa. We have a remarkable scientist in Nairobi called Baldwin Torto, a chemist who is Africa's locust whisperer. He and his team have taught themselves how to talk to locusts through chemical cues. They analyze the chemical signals that locusts use to communicate with one another and have been able to decode their chemical language. They found that the hoppers use different chemical cues to the adults and were able to synthesize the cues concerned. And when they presented their mimic chemical signals to the locusts, the insects responded naturally, which gave Torto the opportunity to modify their behavior. Now they're working on the hypothesis locust eggs release a chemical signal that is a signal for them to hatch. And if they can isolate and synthesize this scent, they may be able to disrupt the breeding cycle. Two more examples. Just north of Cape Town is the Agri-Protein Fly Farm, established by Jason and David Drew, and which won the UN's Innovation Prize for Africa in 2013 and has thrived ever since. They reckon that chickens feed naturally on fly larvae, so why not culture them commercially for chicken and fish farming in place of fish meal? Agri-Protein is now the largest fly farming company in the world. It's expanded into South America, the Middle East, North America, Australia. And each farm has 8.5 billion black soldier flies that convert 250 tons of organic waste per day into protein that is easily assimilated by fish and poultry. And then finally, a Cape Town-based startup called Aerobotics is set to save the agriculture industry millions of dollars using satellite imagery and drone technology. They focus on analyzing data on tree crops such as fruits and nuts and reducing crop losses due to pests and diseases. They've developed software that uses layers of data from satellite and drone imagery to map individual trees so as to identify those suffering from a lack of water or food or from diseases or pests. And from Aerobic's perspective, farming has moved from the age of mechanization to the age of digitization, in which data is analyzed to optimize yields. The next step will be to enable work at leaf level so that pests and disease can be identified before they have affected the whole tree. So those are just a few examples that I've extracted to share with you. Now let's get on to the questions to the panelists. And let's start with our guest from Nigeria, Christopher. Christopher, could you please tell us how exactly does Farm Crowdy work and how does it bring benefits to its stakeholders? Unmute yourself, please.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, Prof, for the opportunity. So as the Prof has said, we are a technology platform that provides tools for farmers and agribusiness players to boost food production in Nigeria. But 4 years ago, we started off as a crowdfunding platform to crowdfund monies for farmers to help them have access to the monies to use to plant, access to inputs, access to agri practices, and access to market. So those were the problems that most of the 38 million small-scale farmers we have in Nigeria were facing. So we built that platform to help them have that access. But along the way, 4 years into that, we found out that the core is technology. Now, technology for the entire agribusiness value chain. Technology that can help, first of all, get the accurate data for farmers so that we can use that data to help them get more funding, one. Technology to help them use inputs better and smarter, two. Technology to help them sell their products, sell their produce, not in their immediate locality, but in their country, in their region, and even in the world. Then, technology that helps identify them and their problems with regards to insurance, health insurance, crop insurance, life insurance, and so on. Then also technology that helps some other businesses, agribusinesses, market their products efficiently. So we split our business from the core to 6 different business units. We have the aggregation, we have the technology and data, which is the core of everything. Then we have the marketing, and we have the foods, which is like a B2C platform, and we have insurance, then marketing. So that is what Farm Crowdy does.
Well, thank you. That is absolutely fascinating. You've obviously given a lot of thought to the conceptualization of Farm Crowdy, and you're catering for all the needs of the farmer right through the production chain.
Yes.
You know, so often only one aspect is focused on, but you're obviously looking at all of them. Could you tell us to what extent has Farm Crowdy been taken up by Nigerian farmers, and are your main clients at the upper end of the technology scale or also at the low tech end?
Okay, so I'll divide into two. The farmers that we cater to are small scale farmers that they don't know how to use technology. So what we've done is we've created mobile applications for our technical field specialists who go into these farms to assist the farmers, train them how to use these inputs and collect data from them. Data as to how these plants are being worked on, pests and all that. The farmers also have a part of it to play where they can see weather data, they can see their own data, they can see what they've been given and what they've given out. They even have mobile wallets to be able to spend their money properly. Yes.
That is amazing. So by gathering data from your clients, you presumably have also developed the capacity to monitor the impact of your interventions.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's extremely valuable information. And do you have any plans to expand beyond Nigeria, or have you done that already?
Yes, definitely. We have plans to expand. We are currently eyeing Ghana, currently eyeing someplace in East Africa, and even in the Caribbean. Yes, in the near future.
Fantastic. Well done. We'll come back to you with more questions. Let's now move on to Louis. Louis, perhaps you can explain why you feel that vertical hydroponics is superior to other more conventional hydroponics and aquaponic systems, and what benefits it brings to your customers.
Thank you very much, Prof. Like you said, my name is Louis Gillis Jansen van Reinsberg. I think I've been blessed or cursed, not 100% sure, with the longest Afrikaans name and surname out there. But just Louis is fine. So I started Fresh Life Produce in 2015. I researched quite a number of different sustainable growing technologies that was out there. And in 2016, I then started my first aquaponic system in Cape Town, in a place called, in Century City, in a place called Ntaka Island. And I used all the information I gathered in 2015, and I started giving classes about how aquaponics works and using your fish and your vegetables, growing them together, and how they benefit one another. But I quickly realized that the technology is very complex, and one needs quite in-depth training in how to run the system. And in theory, it works very well, but in practice, there's a lot of things to look at. So you have to keep your fish alive, you have to keep your plants alive. So you have to know much more than just conventional farming that's looking at one specific crop type. Then I moved over to hydroponics, the traditional hydroponic systems with the PVC pipes that you can stack against your wall. And I started working with the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, and we piloted a range in Philippi area. And we quickly realized that the need for electricity becomes a big problem. And with hydroponics, adding artificial plant food on a regular basis at a specific measurement also becomes quite difficult, as an individual tends to sometimes lose the plant food, or it gets wet, or you add too much plant food, then you make your mixture too strong, and your system then damages the crop that you're growing. So the Department of Agriculture actually asked us to develop something that is much easier to use, something that can be implemented on a much wider scale and doesn't have to have that in-depth training and that in-depth knowledge of what the system, what you need to run the system. So we took quite a while. We then partnered up with a women's co-op called Sakalwazi Women's Hub in Philippi, where we could use their knowledge of what they've been doing in Philippi, how they grow at home. And while we are developing our system, we could test it immediately with the market that we want to support. So we took their inputs, and we developed a vertical growing system that consists of 4 pots that is easily clicked into one another. We then realized the availability of healthy soil is very limited. So we swapped out the soil with a coconut coir that we then have in the kit, is included in the kit. And what is nice about coconut coir, it is very compact when it's still dry, so it could be transported very easily. And when it's wet, or when it's now packed inside the pots, it absorbs a lot of water. So it absorbs up to 10 times more water than soil does. And then we realized that the fertilizer that's used in hydroponic systems becomes a complex thing on its own because of the exact measurements that you need. So we identified a company called Haifa, which is an Israeli fertilizer company, one of the leading fertilizer companies in the world, and which is very interesting. Their South African branch is actually the world leaders in fertilizer they call controlled release fertilizer. So it is small pellets that is coated with a polymer coating, and we mix it into our pots on day one, and it lasts for 8 months. So for the next 8 months, you don't have to add fertilizer again. All your main food or all your main nutrients that the plants need are incorporated in the pot, and the pot looks after itself. So how it works is it almost works like a car's gearbox. So for the first 2 months, certain amount of the pellets are released, and then as soon as it hits 2 months, then the next amount is released, and then the next amount. So it's not a slow release, but a controlled release over a period of 8 months. So that eliminated the room for error in adding fertilizer on a regular basis, and that allowed our users to have quite a large scope of error. So they could, the only thing that they could go wrong was to forget to water their system. And because our Coir then keeps water and moisture in our pots for much longer, that allowed them to do that for much longer. And as they just remember to do that, they water the system, and then the plants jump back and they get everything that they need. But once we've developed we call it the African Grower Tower, we realized that having a technology on its own is not solving all the problems. We need 2 additional things. We need an implementation method. So we created an implementation method called Decentralized Home Farming, where we establish central hubs in communities. These hubs then count as proof of concept and examples for the community what the technology does. And then we establish these networks of home growers that's all linked back to the central point. So we call that decentralized home farming, and that allows us also to generate a value add center at these hubs, which will then be able to buy back the home growers' produce and then convert it into something that is sellable to a larger market, like a chili sauce that we are currently exploring. And then the third thing that we developed on the same time is a data gathering tool. And we're currently working on, with the cooperation with Redisa, with an app called Touch Africa that will allow us to use these members at the hubs to visit the households with the app on their phone and to gather the necessary data that we need to know what are they growing, how's it going with their growth, and how can we support them from at different locations in the country. So we currently established hubs in Philippi. Yes, sorry.
Yep.
Philippi, Kailicha, and then different provinces in South Africa.
Fantastic. It's obvious that, like Christopher, you've thought through the whole process, and you've identified all the areas where your potential stakeholders need interventions. That's amazing. Could you briefly tell us what is the difference between aquaponics and hydroponics?
So aquaponics is, the word consists of aqua and ponos, which is aquaculture, and ponos, which means labor, or Latin in labor. So your fish produces waste through their gills and solid waste, which is actually ammonia, which is actually poisonous for fish. So for some reason, fish are extremely depressed and they really want to, for some reason, poison their own water. And if you leave a fish tank like it is and you don't add any filters, they will eventually die and kill themselves. So luckily with nature, everything works together, and there's a natural occurring bacteria that grows on any surface area. So what you then do is you add a bucket of rocks to your fish tank, and as you pump that fish water through that bucket of rocks, there's a bacteria that grows that converts the ammonia eventually into nitrates, which is very healthy plant food. So you can then plant your plants in this bucket of rocks or bucket of growing media, and they then extract that nitrates or those big, nice, healthy plant food and clean the water, and that clean water goes back into your fish tank. So you have this closed loop system where you use the same water constantly. And the whole idea behind aquaponics is that you grow your edible fish, your protein, and your vegetables in one system, and both of them working together then gives you everything that you need on a plate of food. But unfortunately, as soon as you grow edible fish, or the fish that we like to eat, like your tilapias or your trouts, they become very finicky. So they like very specific things. So your tilapia likes very hot water. So they only move around between 22 and 24 and above temperature. So you then have to add heaters to your water to keep going in the winter. That makes it very difficult. Your trout then likes very clean water and a bit cooler water. So in theory, it's an amazing technology, but in practice, it becomes very technical. Then hydroponics is you add artificial plant food to your system. So it's also hydro, which is water, and ponos, which is labor. So your water does your work for you. And as you add a powder or an artificial plant food, you then give the system everything that it needs, and it's still a closed loop system. So the same water is running in the system. What was found is that it was very suitable for smaller plants that have smaller root systems, but as soon as you go with bigger plants, they need something for their roots to grab onto. So the hydroponics industry introduced a different substrate, which is just a substitute for soil, and one of them were coconut coir. So hydroponics, you can only call a system a hydroponic system if there's no soil involved. So we used then coconut coir as our substitute for soil, and that allowed us to keep the water inside, and the artificial plant food that we then added was then the HIFA technology.
Okay, thanks, Louis. I'm going to have to move. I've got some further questions for you later, but I'll have to move on to Dr. Mangana. Fritoli, can you tell us more about your research on genetic transformation in legumes and micropropagation using plant tissue? Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Prof, for the opportunity. Yes, my name is Fritoli Mangana. I'm senior lecturer in the Department of Biodiversity, University of Limpopo. Let me start by saying that the topic innovation and technology in agriculture, I have a feeling that it's a very important topic. So it shouldn't be a once-off discussion, but it needs to be rendered more available on a day-to-day discussions. I'm simply saying this because I hold the view that it will help to keep track of the trends that we need to keep our eyes on, especially the advancements that could directly impact our lives, the economy, and the environment. But before I dive much into the discussion, Prof, I want to first indicate that my colleagues and I conduct research in different areas, including medicinal plants, plant physiology, and biotechnology, which are all form the basis of the application of biotechnology in agriculture. And obviously they contribute to the evolving agri-tech, including the fourth as well as the emerging fifth industrial revolution. But in line with today's discussion, Prof, I'm happy to highlight a number of beneficial applications using tissue culture propagation or in vitro cultivation coupled with plant transformation. And for the benefit of the attendees who perhaps are not familiar with the technology, plant tissue culture simply refers to the growing of plants or organs or even tissues of plants under strictly controlled environment. This includes the nutrients that you use in the propagation as well as the growth regulators, what we call plant hormones. And there are a number of benefits associated with this. This technology can be applied in germplasm preservation. It can be applied in mass propagation. Of course, this is a standard procedure in some nurseries around the country as well as around the globe, where they use this mass propagation for the species that actually cannot be easily propagated using the traditional method. And most importantly, it plays a very key role in cultivar development. The climate change effects, obviously, that are very detrimental, needs to be counteracted. And so new resistant cultivars are actually desirable. And therefore, this is one of the technologies that we experiment on a daily basis to try and see if we can be able to develop new cultivars that show resistance to both biotic and abiotic stress. And of course, other important applications will include transgenic plants. Fortunately, South Africa doesn't have strict laws on GMOs, but as we had seen in other European and European countries, they are completely banned. But they can be the only solution, especially given the rapid change in the climate and the other challenges that we're facing. And again, this approach can be used in the application of natural and pharmaceutical compounds, where the transformed plants are actually used to derive these compounds, and of course in plant pathology. But in the country, we've seen emergence of tissue culture laboratories. Not that there are no enough tissue culture laboratories, but we find a couple of them in Mpumalanga and the Western Cape. But I think only the Western Cape government has made an effort to establish one tissue culture laboratory in Paarl. So this is one of the, or an example of the kind of initiative that I think we still need to look at and perhaps support. And I think lack of partnership, basically, and resources and investments in this technology is the one that is actually making South Africa to lag behind. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's another example of extremely well conceptualized project. Could I ask you, are you working directly with farmers, or is most of your work in the laboratory?
Yeah, we doing more of laboratory work. But of course, all of our experiments could actually be translated into commercial product. Prof Nikolova is a good example because he managed to actually patent a micropropagation protocol that can actually have the potential to be commercialized. And of course, there are such projects that are underway, and some of them are developed for patent.
Well, congratulations. It's amazing the work that you're doing. I'll come back to you with further questions, but let's finally move on to Renzi. And I'd like to ask Renzi, what is the most innovative solution that READ ISA is bringing to the deployment and support of conservation agriculture technologies in South Africa? And perhaps you could start by defining, what do you mean by conservation agriculture?
Maybe just on the conservation agriculture, I think it's agriculture that deals more responsibly with the resource base in whatever format that happens. So I think that's sort of in my head at least, the short answer on what conservation agriculture is about.
What do you mean by the resource base?
The natural resource base primarily, water is the one that's sort of most easy for everybody to understand. But also the way that we deal with the soil, in terms of replenishing the soil or not replenishing the soil. So all approaches that addresses those degradation or exploitation of the natural resource base, for me, falls under the conservation agriculture banner.
As large sort of organisms relying on sight, we tend not to give enough attention to microscopic things that we can't see with the unaided eye. So it's great that you're focusing on soil health, because to me that seems one of the most critical issues. But carry on. So what exactly is READ ISA doing in the field of conservation agriculture?
Yeah, Prof, as you've indicated, I'm a retired, but I prefer to say refired development scientist. And we specialize in providing back office support services to socioeconomic development champions, of which at this point, Fresh Life Produce is one of the institutions to whom we provide those kind of services. So we provide knowledge-based services and training services, but our biggest contribution is probably a software system that we've developed over many years and that we've taken out of the CSIR now, which enables us to make the informal economy visible. I've got a big passion for leveling the playing field between the formal and the informal economy, and specifically emerging agriculture and established agriculture. So one of the big problems with emerging farmers is that they are not visible. And one of their other big problems is that they often have bigger challenges around the business aspects of farming than around the technical aspects of farming. So we've developed a software system that enables us to to capture the data on these farmers, to do health checks or SWOT analysis on them, both on the technical side and on the business side, and then to develop interventions for those specific small-scale farmers that can then be implemented by the organizations or the networks that they work in. So that is, we are currently moving that whole platform onto the mobile device environment with web backends. So that's exciting.
The software system you've developed, what is it called, and is it an open source system?
Prof, it's called Touch Africa. It is open source in the sense that it runs on an Android platform. But currently, as the source code, or as we're still in development of the latest version, we haven't open sourced the source code, and we will make that decision when we get to that point in time. But it's running on open platforms. We're actually moving away from our old Windows-based platform onto the more open platforms.
You mentioned you're capturing data and you're analyzing that data, no doubt. So that, will this allow you in future to predict trends in small-scale farming and identify problems and solutions that have a broad application?
Yeah, one of the last things I did while I was still at the CSIR was look at what is called big data and small data, specifically in the agricultural domain. And what is meant with small data is the very, very local data. So you have the big data sets, from the satellites and wherever, but very often the small data, the very local data on specific crops and of the condition of specific crops, etc., that's not available. So we worked on ways of making that data, capturing that data and making it visible, even using things like drones in the emerging agriculture space. So I think in future, what would be very nice is that big data and small data can be seamlessly integrated so that one can provide more accurate and very localized advisory services to emerging farmers.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And I really like your term, and I plan to use it in future, that you're refired rather than retired. Fantastic. All right, let's now move on to the second set of questions and go back to Christopher. But Christopher, before I ask you to answer the second question, I have a question from Chandini Naidu. Christopher, what were the major challenges that you encountered at the early stages of implementing the platform, Farm Crowdy, in Nigeria?
Okay, so we had a myriad of issues. First of all was internet penetration. As you rightly know, some of the farms, so majority of the farms are in very remote areas, and it was difficult to get good internet connection there. So what we were able to do was to make the app able to collect local data. Then the technical field specialists will go into town, the urban part, to synchronize data with our servers, which worked for us at that time. Then another problem we had was, you can call it trust issues. So, these farmers are subsistence farmers. They've been doing their practice for years and years, generations and generations. So it's kind of difficult to just come into the community and tell them, look here, we have better ways of doing what you're doing. We have better technologies, better input. They'll be wondering, who are these young lads coming to tell us how to do what we've been doing for generations here. So what we were able to do was to gather or speak with the heads of their communities, who are a lot more educated, per se. So speak with them and show them that this is what we intend to do. Basically, they need value. Once they see value, they will come along with you and do it your way. It must be as little as, instead of planting cassava like this, you plant it like this, and you will see the way it will bring out more yield. So we ended up doing cluster farming, that's test farms. So once you do a test farm and you see that the other farmers see that there is a lot of yield, in that test farm, then they migrate to where we are and say, okay, come and show us what you're doing, come and help us. Now, I don't blame them because a lot of people have come and promised them a lot of things. Some people have even said, bring your harvest, we'll come and pay you back in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they will come back in like 6 months with maybe half the amount that was promised. So the farmers they are there and they are ready to collect anything and not pay you back. So that's one of the other problems we had, trust issues. We give the farmer everything he needs, expecting to get harvest. We've agreed, expecting to get harvest, and they would not give you the harvest, even if they got it for you from you for free. So they're a myriad of issues, but now we've gone past that because now we do contract farming. Contract farming where we go to the government, we get parcels of land, big parcels of lands. The government knows its people. The government gives us farmers, we pay them to farm on contract basis. Then we harvest and sell to off-takers through our platforms.
Oh, that's amazing. It's very, very impressive what you're doing. It seems to me that many of these innovations in agriculture depend on the increased connectivity that we have through cell phones, through the internet, etc. Have you heard of these balloon aerials that have been launched over Kenya, particularly in the Rift Valley, where it's very difficult to create connectivity? They have these balloons in geosynchronous orbits, which are effectively elevated cell phone towers and also for internet connectivity. And they've, allowed even the remotest areas to be connected. It's exciting stuff.
Fantastic. I've seen some from Facebook.
Well, my question to you is, what do you see as the most exciting new development that you are working on in relation to farm crowding?
Okay, so again, because now we're focused on technology, and as everybody knows, technology is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. It's not stagnant at any time. So we're basing our work off of data, big data, and a lot of the time, humans cannot collect the data as much as robots will collect those data. So we're looking at serious advances in robotics and sensing technologies when it comes to artificial intelligence. We're excited about what artificial intelligence can help us do because we have vast lands. The lands in Africa are enormous and they are very fertile. It's difficult for a human, even using drones, it's actually sometimes difficult to map out different places and all that. But with different robotics and sensing technologies, we'll be able to do things in a very micro level and in a major level. So we're excited about artificial intelligence and sensing technologies.
I agree, that's absolutely fascinating and very, very exciting. All right, I must move on to the next panelist, Louis. Louis, interesting that you started at Intaka Island. My son Ryan and I were quite involved in Intaka Island in those early days because we were setting up the MTN Science Centre in Canal Walk. And we were very involved in taking school groups there. So let me ask you, in your particular field of the vertical hydroponics, what do you see as the most exciting developments in the near future?
I think the realization that one specific technology can't bring the answer to the problems that we have. It must be a combination of hardware, software, gathering data, having the right system that works on the field, and then your implementation method as well. So I think in the past, a lot of people thought that software might give all the answers and that technology ran ahead. And then they realized that it's still not making the difference that they thought it would be. And then they thought, okay, the hardware, creating sustainable growing systems like aquaponics and traditional hydroponics might be the answer. And they made it extremely technical and added a lot of sensors and made it very European. And then the realization came, and I think South Africa might be one of the leaders in that, in realizing that we need to develop something that works for us. We don't have to necessarily look over abroad at what works for them. We need to make a hybrid or a South African answer or an African answer for our problems. And I think that is the thing that excites me the most, is these combinations of things that is now creating the answer that we want.
Yeah, I agree entirely. We need to derive African solutions for African problems, and then maybe the rest of the world can learn from us. Now,
absolutely.
Do you have demonstration units, for instance, in Philippi, where the public can go and have a look at what you've done?
Yes, our women's co-op that we work with, Sakalwazi Women's Hub, we have township tours where we've taught the ladies how to make some nice spinach pasta. So we have actually got cooking classes going there where team building and so on can happen. And when you get there, we have quite a lot of these African growers hanging. So you then get your spinach from the African grower and you come and make your pasta, and we have a nice chakalaka on the side. And then at the end, you then build one of the African growers and replant it with spinach, because what you take out, you need to put back. And we have about 180 home growers in Philippi and Kailicha that is all growing their own food. So at the moment, we're at this, we firstly had to prove that the system can be used by the individuals in the community. We now at the stage where we need to prove that our network can work together to create a large farm. So it's a decentralized farm in the community, and that's what we hope
very much an African solution. Now, spinach, of course, is a great food. We need to find an African Popeye with bulging biceps to advertise it. Fantastic.
Well, if you drive around in Philippi, you'll see quite a number of big guys. I was very surprised at the number of Popeyes that's walking around there.
They're all eating spinach, obviously. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
I mean, could my wife and I are very keen vegetable gardeners. Could we create something in our urban garden in Rondebosch?
Absolutely. Our system is available online at freshlifeproduce.co.za or africangrower.com. You can order it online and it will be delivered to your household. But you can also, with just putting a couple of containers together, MacGyver, something that's very easy to maintain. And I think there's a lot of different options out there. We don't believe that our system is necessarily the answer to getting people started or keeping people growing things at home. We believe our system is the mindset changer of changing people from consumers to producers. So getting people to understand that they can actually start growing what they want at home. And by changing that mindset, we hope we can allow them to use any technology that's out there, just to make sure that they start doing that.
Well, you've convinced me. I'm going to be going onto your website later today, and we'll be getting one of your products. Thank you. Let's move on to Fritoli. Fritoli, perhaps you could tell us, in your particular field, what do you see as the most exciting things that you're going to do in the near future?
Thank you, Prof. With us, it's mostly on how, or maybe find a better way that you can develop tools that we normally use in plant tissue culture as well as plant transformation. Because currently, it's very difficult. Actually, most of the legume species that everybody works with around the globe, it's just recalcitrant. So perhaps if maybe one, if not us, could develop protocol in which maybe some of the barriers can be eliminated and be able to efficiently regenerate some transgenic plants without going through difficulties, then that would be much better. But of course, there are other techniques like gene editing that are being introduced, of which already they are exciting, but they are very costly. And we find that they're not applicable for us in terms of cost for now. But then basically the protocol, at least that is compatible with our African genotypes, that one is very much important. I think that's something that we all need to embark on, see if our own genotypes can actually be improved. Because currently we purchase seeds from America and other countries where they are successful in terms of improving them genetically, and therefore it doesn't minimize the cost of seeds. And secondly, farmers are struggling because you buy seeds that do not last, do not have a high viability. So you find that over 2 cycles, then the viability is lost. Then you have to go back to the market again to buy the seeds. So I think that as researchers, we really need to come up with such solutions. And I think it will be very exciting if we can maybe be able to actually develop protocols by optimizing the available protocols and see if we can develop our own tools that we can use in the improvement. And of course, one of the highlights would be if we are able to actually develop drought tolerant genotypes from our own indigenous genotypes. There are actually a lot of legumes in Africa that are not necessarily used, especially commercially. So even if you check in the number of cultivars that we have for cowpea, for example, there's just great number of cultivars that are just not being utilized. And I think in that case, if we can maybe even do a germplasm analysis and maybe be able to select those that can actually be able to be improved, or we take their alleles and incorporate in the new ones, then that would be much better. But generally, I think the tools that could be helpful for us will be the most exciting ones, actually. And because of the protocols that we are currently using, we still kind of like have a long way to go. Thank you.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, I note from your bio that you're very actively involved internationally. Has your work received a lot of attention internationally?
Yeah, I can see that, Prof. Because as a researcher, we know that one of the most important elements of research is publications and being recognized for that through citations and other means. And of course, I think people are realizing what we are trying to do. And so far, with the kind of invitations that we normally receive, or the kind of collaborations that we receive from researchers abroad, then I think we are really in the right track.
When I was in my mid-career, I was very involved with the NRF's evaluation system, and I always argued that what we've got to measure productivity on is not just publications, but all outputs, because there are other very valuable outputs that scientists like you are making, which aren't necessarily captured in publications, and credit should be given for all of them. All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to Renzi, and Renzi, perhaps you can say, what do you see as the most exciting new developments in conservation agriculture in the near future?
Prof, I think one of the things is, COVID made one wonder about the future. And I think one of the things which I, for myself, have seen as a kind of a sign on the horizon is the localization of value chains. Especially in agriculture, we tend to have very long value chains. I think we will in future be dependent on much shorter value chains. And therefore, within that shorter value chains, the data has to be localized. The resolution of a lot of the data we have is too big. We have weather data that covers an area, but it doesn't cover Vuani village outside of Thohoyandou specifically. So I'm excited about, and I've referred to it lightly beforehand, about this marriage of big and small data, global data versus very, very localized data, even data of down to my 4 hectares or my 3 hectares that I have as a smallholder. And then within the, fourth industrial revolution kind of context, the integration of those data sets and the interpretation of those data sets in real time, so that the advisory services to your small scale farmers can be much more immediate and doesn't come post fact. So those are the kinds of things that excite me.
Oh, that's fascinating. You mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. In my books on innovation, I've argued that we're not in a fourth industrial revolution. If anything, we're in an anti-industrial or post-industrial revolution, because we now realize that the first three industrial revolutions created a great deal of harm to the planet, and they didn't benefit all the human inhabitants of the planet. And a lot of the technologies that are being developed now are actually undoing that harm, and therefore are to a degree anti or post-industrial. I mean, do you regard COVID as a sort of paradigm shift? Is it going to change the extent to which agriculture and its products are globalized?
Prof, I think it's early days. You know, we all talk about the Great Reset and sort of using the opportunity to do away with a lot of those injustices. But I'm not convinced. I haven't seen, and one of the things I haven't seen is the leadership, you know, in all kinds of places to help us sort of capitalize on the opportunity. But I think there is an opportunity. I think it seems like the agricultural domain will come under a lot of stress probably in the next year. So it will be interesting to see how we innovatively respond to that. I think you know, COVID has enhanced the interconnectedness between people, and it's broken down a lot of the traditional barriers, you know, because of the interaction being able to be digital. So I think we'll have to see whether we can capitalize on that in the new year and in the future coming up.
To an extent, this is the first time that humankind has had one common enemy, and we've potentially been able to all collaborate in battling that enemy. And a lot of people are hoping that this approach will be taken into the future in terms of addressing biodiversity loss, climate change, and, you know, also agricultural innovations.
Yeah, I think my only worry is that so there is an opportunity for combined rationalism globally, but we've also seen a lot of emotionalism. So I think the question is, you know, will reason at the end of the day survive, or are we going to be drowning in emotionalism and in unreasonable activities?
Also inward-looking populist politics. Yeah. All right, we're now going to have to start wrapping up. And I have another question which I want to put to all the panelists from Sayanda Sishuba. I'd like to find out, in developing these technologies for our farmers, who funds the creation of these technologies, and what are the challenges when it comes to funding these technologies? Brian, perhaps you could have all the panelists on the screen, and then anyone who'd like to respond to, you know, how are these technologies funded and what are the challenges in getting that funding? Renzi, would you like to kick off?
I was busy typing to Sianda. One of the we were fortunate to access some of the support through the Technology Innovation Agency, which is an agency under the Department of the Science, Technology and Innovation, who have set up so-called technology stations at various universities. Those technology stations all focus on different fields. And we were able to be helped by the University of Joburg's process, environment, and not sure what the last E was, technology station in developing some of the agricultural technologies we needed for our initiative.
Christopher, can you comment on funding? Go ahead. Christopher, do you have any comments on where you got your funding from in Nigeria and the problems you had to solve?
Yes.
Go ahead.
SMA in 2018, because we needed to create a mobile application for farmers to be able to access data from us. And we're also able to create another mobile application for our technical field specialists to collect data from the farmers and from their farms. So we use it to monitor their farms. So that's how we were able to access funding. Although before that, we got funding from angel investors and venture capitalists, but just a minimal one. Yes.
Okay, so your project is actually generating the funding you need to continue developing it.
Yes.
That's fantastic. All right, let's go to Louis.
I think what was important for us in the beginning is to diversify, knowing what we want to develop, but understanding that in the beginning it's not going to bring in the income that we need to survive. So finding additional income sources like we did training and consultations and different things to stay alive, and understanding that one needs to maybe sometimes not focus too much on the specific technology that you want to develop, understanding that that is going to take time and that is going to not immediately generate the income that you might need. So understanding that you might need to diversify from the start to get to the end point. And that's the only thing that we learned. And then to understand that you need to be able to change very quickly. If you see that something doesn't work, fail fast and move on, and change as you must. Have a big dream at the end. So I had the dream of helping people grow their own food. And in the beginning, when I started with aquaponics, I thought that was the beginning and the end of how to grow food. But I quickly needed to realize that the technology that you use to get to your dream isn't always the answer. The dream at the end is the answer.
Okay, then finally, Fritoli, how would, you know, what? Sorry, we've been through everyone, haven't we? Okay, now I'd like to end with a very general question to everyone, and in this one, I'd like you to climb out of your specialized silos and look at agriculture very broadly, especially in Africa, and briefly just tell me, you know, what do you think is the most exciting thing that's going to happen in the near future in agriculture? Fritoli, would you like to start? Are you muted? Okay.
All right, thank you, Prof. Although I haven't commented on funding,
sorry. Please, I missed you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, briefly, because I just wanted to indicate that for research it's a bit difficult, actually, very difficult, because we are heavily reliant on the National Research Foundation, and it's just difficult. But I think maybe external funders like the Oppenheimers and the African Academy of Science, they do offer something. And I think maybe I can encourage that people actually look at that and see if they can secure some funds from them. And in terms of the exciting technology in agriculture, maybe in the near future, if it's going to be possible, it's actually in relation to the fourth or fifth industrial revolution. I would just personally would like to see how robots will work in terms of harvest and post-harvest measures, because right now I think maybe that's where also our approach in research should actually go to, because now there are post-harvest challenges that farmers are facing that we haven't really thought of developing newly improved genotypes that could actually even address the produce at a later stage. Yeah, I think I'll pack it there, Prof. Thank you.
Okay, well, would you like to kick off on, you know, what the most exciting big development in agriculture is beyond your field?
Pardon, Prof?
If we look beyond your field, beyond your specialization, and for Africa as a whole, what do you think is the most exciting thing that's happening? I mean, one that I've identified is the ability of African people to carry out that technology leapfrog, you know, almost from pre-industrial to post-industrial through social media and so on. Do you think that's a defining characteristic of innovation in Africa?
I think so, but let me add that so far we've seen a lot of development in terms of mobile apps. You know, there are many mobile apps that even subsistence farmers or smallholder farmers in rural farming setups are actually using. And I believe that as more people are familiar now with technology, I think it's going to be very exciting to actually see how this will turn out. But although things like drones, I mean, if we were to be realistic, not everyone can actually afford to introduce them into their farming setup, especially at rural. But I think it will be very exciting to see how they can be more affordable versions of drones that actually people can be able to access. Yes.
Yeah, it's something else that I've identified in Africa is that we have a sort of step ladder from very low tech through medium tech to high tech. And our technologists are able to sort of grow themselves by going up that step ladder. Whereas in many developing countries, it's only really the high tech stuff that's being focused on. So it doesn't create that kind of step ladder. Do you think that's something important in Africa?
I think that you are right, Prof, because one of the things that I've noticed is that even the technology that we talk about, the agri-tech that we're talking about right now, actually only the big farmers can actually have access to it. And it leaves out the rest of the emerging farmers. And I think maybe with the help of government, I think something should actually be done. But also for researchers to actually try and modify and produce maybe more affordable versions of their tech, that would also actually go a long way. And also the other biggest problem is that you see most of these techs that are being introduced or widely applied across the farming industry, we find that they're developed abroad, and that is also a problem because it seems as if we are very far from developing our own technology. And I think if maybe our focus could be on trying to develop our own, then probably that will really assist.
Right. Okay, I'd like to ask the other panelists, would any of you like to make a comment on the big next thing that's going to happen in agriculture in Africa? Louis?
I think with COVID, the urban agriculture was always a word that was thrown around quite easily, but it was never taken seriously. And that it's still not really being something that that people are doing on a large scale. But I think with COVID, we've just realized how quickly something like that virus can spread through the world and eliminate the possibility of moving around. So I think agriculture, I hope that agriculture is always seen as something of people that's doing it on the outskirts of town or of individuals that has large scale farms. I think that mentality needs to change very quickly, in the sense that we all need to start growing something at home, even if it's on any scale possible, because this virus can happen extremely easy, and it can happen without any warning. And if you can't move around, how are you going to feed yourself? If we're not in a place where there's Amazon and that can deliver food with drones to your front door, what are we going to do to feed ourselves? So I'm really hoping that urban agriculture is something that grows quickly, and it's really needed.
And of course, urban agriculture greatly reduces one's individual carbon footprint. You know, all the transport costs of food are eliminated, and you know, we're far more self-dependent. And of course, you don't have to be at ground level with a garden full of soil. You can be in a high-rise apartment, because there are a lot of initiatives in high-rise buildings where farming is carried out on the roof of the building, sort of collaboratively by the community in the building.
Absolutely. Just a small example is spinach loses up to 90% of its vitamin C, or plus minus, within 24 hours after harvest. So you might buy fresh spinach from the shop and you think it looks good, but it's lost so much nutrients with the amount of travel it did. The value is not there anymore. And there's a lot of vegetables that loses quite a nice, good amount of very healthy stuff because of their traveling and their time that they spend in packets.
Christopher, do you have any broad comments on the most exciting innovations in Africa agriculture as a whole?
Yes. So Africa's problem is actually not farming. I think Africa's problem is smart farming. And we have different levels of farmers. We have the small scale, the large scale. If everybody can come together and help one another, so I'm a technology person, farm produce technology. So I see a big boom in connectivity. That's what I see when it comes to technology. Connectivity as regards smart crop monitoring, drone farming, smart livestock monitoring, autonomous farming machinery, smart building and equipment management. Everything smart. And the governments can actually subsidize a lot of these things. Like Dr. Fritoli said, if the government can, or organizations can actually do more research and make these things cheaper for people to be able to afford it and use it. Because using it will really help in food production. Yes, that's my take.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely, the future is smart technology, and technology is as if people matter. You know, we're not replacing people, we're improving their quality of life. Renzi, any comments from you?
I think sort of just building on what both you and Christopher have said, one thing that I would love to see is how can we make Ubuntu work in Africa in terms of, you know, the diversity coming together, but still keeping the warmth. I think we've seen some glimpses of how, you know, the connectedness can bring us closer together, but it's sometimes still a little bit dehumanized. So I would love to see how you know, advisory services can be scaled up to become virtual, but still stay personal. And I think that's some of the stuff which still lies ahead of us.
I'm glad you mentioned Ubuntu, because to me, the whole ethos of Ubuntu epitomizes the approach that we need towards agriculture and towards natural resource management, an approach of respect and of humility and working within the limits of the system. All right, well, we're well over time. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I'd like to thank all the panelists most sincerely for their willing participation and their insightful comments. And I hope that all our listeners have been inspired by the discussion. I'd like to point out that SciFest will be offering 3 further events next week to finish off this year. And then these webinars will continue again from the second week of January onwards. So please, in the closing slide that you'll see in a moment, you'll be able to see the website details of SciFest. And I recommend that you go to the website and find out more about forthcoming events. So to everyone, thank you very, very much for your participation. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.